Good morning to you. Mark Sutton with HurricaneTrack.com here with your hurricane outlook and discussion, focusing on Hurricane Humberto this morning more than anything else. We do have a few other areas to watch in the Atlantic. I will go over these in more detail in my afternoon update today. Going to have two updates, mainly because of Humberto, and a few impacts to talk about, including dangerous surf conditions here along the southeast coast, the possible threat to Bermuda, and then the big question mark as to what happens somewhere in this zone up here. Some of the modeling starting to get a little bit interesting again, as if we thought this was going to be easy and on out to sea. There are a few questions that are starting to arise regarding that scenario. So the latest on Humberto from the 5 a.m. advisory from the National Hurricane Center, forecast to become stronger. It's 85 miles per hour right now for the top winds. Fairly large wind field overall. That's the tropical storm force wind area there in the orange, and you can see the forecast track here. Looks like it's going to pull up and gain more latitude before it reaches Bermuda's longitude, and still this area would be in the southeast flank of the storm hurricane, and you would expect some pretty strong southwest to southerly winds, some passing showers, rough seas. Not the best weather, but certainly a better scenario than the center of this passing over Bermuda. It doesn't look like that's going to happen, but you never know. In fact, there could be a few interesting days ahead. Not necessarily from Bermuda. I think it's looking better. I think this is going to slow down and pull up even more to the north, and I'll show you my reasoning on that in just a moment. Looking at the satellite imagery here, the wide shot of the Atlantic Basin. There's Humberto, energy from it getting stretched out here with this trough and the westerly winds affecting it in the mid-latitudes there. But where the core is down here, it's fairly well protected, and this is forecast to strengthen. It won't surprise me at all if this becomes a Category 3 hurricane at some point. Why not? Everything else this year, as of late, has tried to overachieve. Water temperatures are plenty warm in this part of the Atlantic, and they usually get stronger. Overall, we know intensity guidance is where the least amount of skill is, so I always think of them in this kind of environment as, they're going to reach a stronger potential than what the official forecast shows, and that's just the nature of the beast. That's the way it goes, so we'll see about that. I predict that this will peak out at about 120, 125 miles per hour, and that would certainly produce some impressive swells that'll move their way back towards the coast here, and I'm going to look at this in more detail in just a moment. One thing I want to read here in the discussion, this is the 5 a.m. discussion here from forecaster Brown, Mr. Daniel Brown, and he does mention the swells here, and this is a big problem, and the rip current threat is going to be very high. I'm going to show you this more in just a minute. In this area, and you see, by the way, the forecast of 110 miles per hour, my guess here of 120, 125, not too far-fetched. Certainly wouldn't take much for that to be attained, considering they are looking at 110 miles per hour for their peak. Nevertheless, interesting tidbits here in the discussion paragraph regarding the future steering. They are talking about the different patterns over the Atlantic, etc. But if you look right here towards the end, it says, given the model spread of more than 1,000 nautical miles at day 5, the NHC track forecast remains close to the multi-model consensus, but confidence in the 4 and 5 day forecast is rather low. That's interesting, isn't it? And I'll show you why that is the case in just a moment. So the broader picture again, there's Humberto. This is an area that we need to watch because it could bring some rather heavy rain to parts of Texas over here, and it might try to develop there at the last minute. Pretty good increase in convection here moving into the islands. No mention on the tropical weather outlook at the 8 a.m. time frame. Maybe at 2 p.m. it will. I think this is what used to be 96L. Here's 97L. And, more systems lining up coming off Africa. There's a fairly stout Saharan air layer getting ejected out into the Atlantic as well. And it's interesting because this drier, more stable air, if that thwarts the development of this, by a couple of days, we see the model guidance and the overall outlook cone generally suggesting development in this area. Well, each day that doesn't happen, let's say it doesn't develop out here, and you shift it a little bit more this way, and then a little bit more. You see how that progresses. We've seen it. So the longer that this takes to develop, the more west it'll get. I mean, duh. So something to watch as we go forward. And I'll talk about this in more detail in the update coming later today. For you folks in the Gulf, the Northwest Gulf here, certainly the oil interests out over the Gulf of Mexico, paying attention to this. Hopefully lots of convection, shower and thunderstorm activity. I bet there's a few water spouts out there. Who knows what gets seen from those oil rigs from United States and Mexico that have all those oil rigs, those platforms out there. I bet there's some very interesting things that get seen weather-wise. And, I don't know, maybe there should be a YouTube channel or a website just dedicated to weird weather seen by oil rig professionals, because underneath some of these storms, I bet you there are some water spouts and other interesting shelf clouds and whatnot. Not much in the way of rotation. There's a little bit of broad turning. If we look at the vorticity signature, not only for that area but the rest of the Atlantic, obviously there's Humberto, lots of energy lined up out over the Atlantic, but one lobe of energy here in the Northwest Gulf, another one farther to the south approaching northern Mexico. But the modeling suggesting maybe something tries to come together here, kind of slowly goes south and then comes north. I don't know. In terms of a big wind event, I don't see much, but a big rainmaker coming up for parts of coastal Texas to areas maybe 100 or so miles inland seems inevitable. So we'll watch this closely, and I will address this as well this afternoon in more detail. So the rip current threat is a big deal, seriously. So the water temperatures are still warm. We're talking about low 80s in the surf, and from the North Carolina Outer Banks all the way around, and this includes down the coast, okay, all the way down through the Carolinas. If I go down and click on South Carolina, you see that this little blue color here, sort of sea green, whatever that is, not quite cyan, but the blue coloring, we'll just call it that. I will outline it in yellow, okay? This is all the rip current beach hazard statement, and this is a very, very serious threat. The rip current threat is high, and it's really, really bad, all right? So, like, if you go down to the beach and you're not prepared for this, you could get pulled out, and it can kill you. And you're going to see that in the news coming up. And this extends all the way down, not just in the Carolinas, as I alluded to, but even on the east coast of Florida here. Scroll down. There we go. Very problematic, this onshore, parallel onshore flow in some cases. It depends on where you are. A lot of stuff right in here. Read this. Go to weather.gov, put in your zip code, and read it. And as an example, you look on the coastal flood statement. This is written out of the National Weather Service, Jacksonville, Florida. And, tidal impacts 1 to 1.5 feet. St. Johns River from downtown Jacksonville. Why? Well, that water level kind of pushed onshore, stiff northeast wind, what we call a pressure gradient, and other factors leading to these indirect impacts here along the coast from Hurricane Humberto that's way out over here off the map. All right, so even though you've got Humberto sitting out here well offshore, don't think that there won't be impacts for the Carolinas and Florida. All right, please remember that we're not just worried about this one little area right there. A hurricane is a giant weather machine, and it's going to generate a lot of energy in the ocean, and that could be a big problem for people going to the beach. So, again, to reemphasize this for Bermuda, I see less of a threat overall, which is great news. I will not be making any trips to Bermuda for this system. It doesn't warrant my attention. I'd rather go to Bermuda, like with my wife or something down the road and hang out for a little bit when there's not a hurricane coming. But I never seem to be able to do that. Maybe someday. So Bermuda is looking much better so far. Hopefully that'll remain the case. All right, looking at the modeling here, I thought this was interesting. This is a different vantage point than I usually show. This is your 500 millibar heights and your sea level pressure, and you really get an idea of the outline of the ridges through here. There's some ridging there. It gives you a good visualization. And there's Humberto right there. This is the east coast of the U.S. Over here, there's Florida. You get the idea. Now watch as I just use the slider here. This is from the 6Z guidance, and you see Humberto going out. There's Bermuda. By the way, I'm going to just mark Bermuda in blue so you can always see it there. And you see Humberto comes out, and then it turns up. It pulls up right before it gets to Bermuda, most of the energy there. And watch out here in the Atlantic, that high builds in right there, that darker colored red or crimson, whatever you want to call it. The ridge trying to build in there, and Humberto is sliding along, and then look, it tries to come back to the northwest there. It's like, so what we're going to be looking to see, I don't want to say looking for, because it's like, that sounds like, oh yeah, let's look for that. That could be great. Well, no, it's not. Does this start to nose in more? And if it comes out even more, this comes back even more. Yes, there is the possibility that this could try to, what did it do? Come up and then come back. I mean, Sandy did that. I'm just saying, we remember that weird things happen with tropical systems. And that's the only parallel here. We see something like this where you think it's a done deal. Oh, it's going to go out to sea, but then, whoop, maybe not. See? And it's not just the GFS. This is the operational model. That's why we have ensembles, so we can look at a lot of variations of the model. But look at what the Euro is showing here from the Weather Nerd site. It has 51 members, 50 plus the operational, if I understand that correctly. And while a majority of the envelope here of the guidance is, out, away, safely, and it continues that, a lot of members don't do that. A lot of them now. Too many to even start counting this from the 0Z run. And yes, there are a few members that do get this all the way back to North Carolina. And more that get it, quite close, relatively speaking, to New England and maybe the Maritimes up here, especially Newfoundland. Atlantic Canada needs to watch. So how this evolves over the next few days is going to be interesting. The slower this takes to go, I think the more this ridge could build back in, and it could get more interesting. That's all I'm going to say. I don't, it's like, come on, just go and be done with you. So we'll see. I'll talk about this more in the afternoon update as well, based on 12Z guidance. In the afternoon update, I will also take a look at current sea surface temperature anomalies, a look ahead to this very favorable Madden-Julian oscillation that's supposed to swing through, and other interesting things that I believe are going to shape the future of a very busy end to September and into October. We will look at that in much more detail in the afternoon update. Probably publish it somewhere between 4 and 5 p.m. Eastern. All right, that's a look at things for now. Thanks as always for tuning in. I do appreciate it. I am Mark Sudduth for HurricaneTrack.com. I'll talk to you again this afternoon.